In this episode, Ben Shapiro explores several pressing issues, including controversies in transgender medicine, the retracting of a major climate change economic impact study, and the Trump administration's regulatory rollback on fuel economy standards. He further discusses immigration policies, political strategies heading into upcoming elections, economic challenges, and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Shapiro addresses a recent expose by the Free Press, revealing unsettling practices within transgender healthcare. He highlights how clinicians privately admit to performing unproven experimental procedures with little to no formal research or ethical oversight. Cases like that of an 18-year-old named Sky illustrate a disturbing trend where patients seeking radical gender-related surgeries, including genital nullification, bypass traditional psychiatric counseling. Instead of evaluating the mental health and long-term consequences, doctors are reportedly prioritizing fulfilling the patient's expressed desires, even when these requests defy established medical guidelines. This patient-driven model, as described by social worker Amy Pankin, deviates dramatically from the conventional role of medicine, which is to diagnose and treat based on biological realities and scientific evidence. Psychologists like Mayor Marcio further complicate the issue by advocating for surgical interventions even in patients with serious mental illnesses, such as multiple personalities or psychosis. Shapiro underscores this as a dangerous departure from standard medical ethics, equating it to endorsing self-mutilation grounded in delusion. The report also exposes a culture of groupthink among professionals, with clinicians making collaborative decisions to shield themselves from criticism amid a dearth of outcome data for novel procedures like vaginoplasties and phalloplasties. The widespread acceptance of fluid and non-binary gender identities in medical circles, once treated as scientific consensus, is now portrayed as lacking solid empirical support, challenging the decade-long narrative promoted by media, academia, and entertainment. Shapiro moves to climate science, focusing on a high-profile paper published in Nature projecting a catastrophic 62% drop in global economic output by 2100 due to climate change. The study, which analyzed data from 1,600 regions worldwide, was quickly adopted by influential institutions including the U.S. Congressional Budget Office and the World Bank to inform risk assessments and financial regulations. However, other researchers discovered critical errors, specifically flawed economic data from Uzbekistan between 1995 and 1999, which heavily skewed projections. Upon correction, the economic damage forecast dropped significantly to 23%. Acknowledging these methodological shortcomings, the authors retracted the paper entirely, raising concerns about reliance on faulty models in policymaking. Shapiro argues that such false scientific claims fuel misguided economic regulations, underscoring the importance of evidence-based policy. He applauds the Trump administration's decision to ease fuel economy standards and resist overly burdensome climate regulations that inflate costs without delivering meaningful environmental benefits. The podcast details the Trump administration's move to lower corporate average fuel economy (CAFE) standards from 50.4 to 345 miles per gallon by 2031. This rollback aims to reduce car prices and boost affordability amid a challenging economic landscape where regulatory compliance had dramatically increased vehicle costs. The new rules also eliminate the credit trading system that benefited companies like Tesla. Shapiro portrays this measure as a necessary corrective to the Green New scam and a restoration of market balance, noting that it garnered support from major automakers like Ford, Stellantis, and GM. By rolling back these aggressive regulations, the administration anticipates saving American consumers over $100 billion across 5 years and protecting auto industry jobs. Shapiro contrasts this with Europe's costly and economically damaging green transition, which, despite achieving sizable carbon emissions reductions, resulted in exorbitant electricity prices and industrial setbacks. Turning to immigration, the podcast highlights shifting stances within the Democratic Party, with figures like House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeff acknowledging President Trump's success in securing the southern border, a notable departure from prior opposition. Nonetheless, Democrats continue to criticize Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, a stance complicated by ICE's role targeting criminal illegal immigrants, an area of broad Republican concern. Shapiro underscores growing Republican efforts to legislate restrictions on federal benefits for non-citizens and to impose stricter vetting on Afghan nationals. He connects these policies to recent incidents implicating immigrants in violent plots which fuel public unease. The podcast describes how some Democrats' radical critiques, such as equating ICE to Nazi Germany or calling for investigations into CIA death squads instead of border enforcement, risk alienating moderates and empowering Republican messaging on immigration as a unifying, winnable issue. Shapiro assesses emerging political trends, noting that Republicans face challenges despite holding recent special election wins, citing the narrowing margins in Tennessee's 7th congressional district as a warning sign. Democrats, meanwhile, appear to be moderating tone on contentious issues like transgender rights, immigration enforcement, and economic equity. California Governor Gavin Newsom's calls for a more culturally normal Democratic Party signal attempts to broaden appeal and address internal party excesses. The podcast emphasizes that Republicans must avoid complacency, develop resonant policy platforms, and not rely on Democratic missteps to secure victories. Shapiro also reviews polling analyses suggesting a potential Democratic resurgence in the 2026 midterms if Republicans fail to adapt. Addressing the economy, Shapiro notes recent ADP data indicating a decline in private sector hiring, contradicting earlier positive trends and raising concerns about Federal Reserve monetary policy and inflation. He critiques approaches favoring short-term stimulus checks or tariffs, arguing these are ineffective compared to supply-side deregulation and innovation aimed at sustainable economic growth. Healthcare costs receive particular scrutiny, revealing that despite the Affordable Care Act, national health spending per capita has doubled since 2010, with private insurance costs rising sharply. Shapiro references experts who stress the need to reform the regulatory environment comprehensively to bend the healthcare cost curve, warning that incremental fixes or continued subsidy expansions represent political maneuvers rather than durable solutions. The episode touches on stalled diplomatic efforts between the U.S. and Russia concerning the Ukraine war. Recent Moscow talks failed to produce compromise, as Russian President Vladimir Putin felt emboldened by recent military gains, influencing his rejection of certain U.S. proposals. Shapiro remarks on the American public's complex views on withdrawal, that while people accept disengagement in principle, they recoil at the chaos and losses that withdrawal can precipitate. The podcast highlights the ongoing challenges the Biden administration faces in managing this protracted conflict and the geopolitical implications of a possible Russian victory. Finally, Shapiro discusses Republicans' intensified critiques of mainstream media outlets, such as the New York Times. He cites media figures openly admitting to disengaging with certain news sources due to perceived bias and sensationalism, noting that negative portrayals of conservatives and Trump are widespread and often misleading. The podcast underscores the political strategy of attacking legacy media as a means of energizing the base and countering unfavorable narratives ahead of future elections. Shapiro also touches on internal Republican debates about messaging priorities, including shifting focus from Obamacare tax credits toward drug price reductions in healthcare discussions.